A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Building background. A special kind of storytelling. In his stories, Gabriel Garcia Marquez draws upon the folktales and superstition of the townspeople he knew as a child in Colombia, a Spanish-speaking country in South America. He weaves those tales of mysterious creatures and superstitions into a special kind of story, a tale of magical realism, which blends fantasy and reality and often uses exaggeration. One example of the kind of exaggeration is reporting that someone cried so much that she flooded the first floor of the house in which she lived. In some cultures around the world, people accept this blend of fantasy and reality as a normal part of everyday life. Even the title of Garcia Marquez's story suggests that this blending will be demonstrated in A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. The particular way in which a piece of literature is written is called style. Many elements are contributed to a writer's style, including word choice, tone, use of dialogue, sentence length, use of figurative language, and point of view. Among many Latin American writers, magical realism is a special type of style. The elements of word choice, tone, and use of figurative language are particularly important in magical realism. As you read A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, look for the use of these elements. A Man with Enormous Wings by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. On the third day of rain, they had killed so many crabs inside the house that Pelayo had to cross the drenched courtyard and throw them into the sea. Because the newborn child had a temperature all night, they thought it was due to the stench. The world had been sad since Tuesday. Sea and sky were a single ash-gray thing, and the sands of the beach, which on March nights glimmered like powdered light, had become a strew of mud and rotten shellfish. The light was so weak at noon that when Pelayo was coming back to the house after throwing away the crabs, it was hard for him to see what it was that was moving and groaning in the rear of the courtyard. He had to go very close to see that it was an old man, a very old man, lying face down in the mud, who, in spite of tremendous efforts, couldn't get up, impeded by his enormous wings. Frightened by that nightmare, Pelayo ran to get Elsenda, his wife, who was putting compresses on the sick child, and he took her to the rear of the courtyard. They both looked at the fallen boy with mute stupor. He's dressed like a rag picker. There were only a few faded hairs left on his bald skull and very few teeth in his mouth, and his pitiful condition of drenched great-grandfather had taken away any sense of grandeur he might have had. His huge buzzard wings, dirty and half-plucked, were forever entangled in the mud. He looked at him so long and so closely that Pelayo and Isilda very soon overcame their surprise, and in the end found him familiar. They dared speak to him, and he answered in incomprehensible dialect with strong sailor's voice. That was how they skipped over the inconvenience of the wings and quite intelligently concluded that he was a lonely castaway from a foreign ship wrecked by the storm. And yet they called in a neighbor woman who knew everything about life and death to see him, and all she needed was one look to show them their mistake. "He's an angel," she told them. "He must have been coming for the child. The poor fellow is so old that the rain knocked him down." On the following day everyone knew that a flesh and blood angel was held captive in Pelayo's house. Against the judgment of the wise neighbor woman, from whom the angels in those times were very fugitive survivors of a celestial conspiracy, they did not have the heart to club him to death. Pelayo watched over him all afternoon from the kitchen, armed with his bailiff's club, and before going to bed he dragged him out of the mud and locked him up with the hens in the wire chicken coop. In the middle of the night, when the rain stopped, Pelayo and Isilda were still killing crabs. A short time afterward, the child woke up with a fever and without a fever and with a desire to eat. When they felt magnanimous and decided to put the angel out on a raft with fresh water and provisions for 3 days and leave him to his fate on the high seas. But when they went into the courtyard with the first light of dawn, they found the whole neighborhood in front of the chicken coop having fun with the angel, without the slightest reverence, tossing him things to eat through the openings in the wire, as if he weren't a supernatural creature, but a circus animal. Father Gonzaga arrived before 7 o'clock, alarmed at the strange news. By the time onlookers less frivolous than those at dawn had already arrived, and they were making all kinds of conjectures concerning the captive's future. The simplest among them thought he should be named mayor of the world. Others, sterner mind, felt that he should be promoted to the rank of 5-star general in order to win wars. Some visionaries hoped he would be put to stud in order to implant the earth a race of winged wise men who could take charge of the universe. But Father Gonzaga, before becoming a priest, had been a robust woodcutter. Standing by the wire, he reviewed the chastism in an instant and asked them to open the door so he could take a closer look at that pitiful man who looked more like a huge decrepit hen among the fascinated chickens. He was laying in the corner, drying his open wings in the sunlight among the fruit peels and breakfast leftovers that earlier risers had thrown him. Alien to the impertinencies of the world, he only lifted his antiquarian eyes and murmured something in his dialect when Father Gonzaga went into the chicken coop and said good morning to him in Latin. The parish priest had his first suspicion of an impostor when he saw that he did not understand the language of God or know how to greet his ministers. Then he noticed that seen close up he was much too human. He had an unbearable smell of the outdoors, and the backside of his wings was strewn with parasites, and his main feathers had been mistreated by terrestrial winds, and nothing about him measured up to the proud dignity of angels. Then he came out of the chicken coop in a brief sermon, warned the curious against the risks of being ingenuous. He reminded them that the devil had the bad habit of making use of carnival tricks in order to confuse the unwary. He argued that if wings were not the essential element in determining the difference between a hawk and an airplane, they were even less so in the recognition of angels. Nevertheless, he promised to write a letter to his bishop, so the latter would write to his primate, so that the latter would write to the super pontiff in order to get the final verdict from the highest courts. His prudence fell on sterile hearts. The news of a captive angel spread with such rapidity that after a few hours the courtyard had a bustle of a marketplace, and they had to call in troops with fixed bayonets to disperse the mob that was about to knock the house down. Elsenda, her spine all twisted from sweeping up so much marketplace trash, then got the idea of fencing in the yard, of changing 5 cents admission to see the angel. The curious came from far away. A traveling carnival arrived with flying acrobat who buzzed over the crowd several times, but no one paid attention to him because his wings were not those of an angel, but rather those of a sidereal bat. The most unfortunate invalids on earth came in search of health. A poor woman who since childhood had been counting her heartbeats had run out of numbers, a Portuguese man who couldn't sleep because the noise of the stars disturbed him, a sleepwalker who got up at night to undo things he had done while awake, and many others with less serious ailments. In the midst of the shipwreck disorder that made the earth tremble, Peleo and Isilda were happy with fatigue, for in less than a week they had crammed their rooms with money, and the line of pilgrims waiting to turn to enter still reached beyond the horizon. The angel was the only one who took no part in his own act. He spent his time trying to get comfortable in his burrowed nest, befuddled by the hellish heat of the oil lamps and sacramental candles that had been placed along the wire. At first they tried to make him eat some mothballs, which, according to the wisdom of the wise neighbor woman, were a food prescribed for angels. But he turned them down, just as he turned down the palpable lunches that the penitents brought him. And they never found out whether it was because he was an angel or because he was an old man in the end and ate nothing but eggplant mush. His only supernatural virtue seemed to be his patience, especially during the days when the hens pecked at him, searching for the stellar parasites that proliferated his wings, and the cripples pulled out feathers to touch their defective parts with, and even the most merciful threw stones at him, trying to get him to rise so they could see him standing.